Hello friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. My name is Trooper Mike Kellerman, and I've been serving with the Alaskan State Troopers for 23 years. I've seen everything you can imagine in this job. Domestic violence, calls that turned into murder scenes, car accidents and blizzards that left families frozen in their vehicles, and missing persons cases where we found bodies 6 months later, perfectly preserved by the cold. But nothing in my experience prepared me for what I discovered at the Hendricks family cabin on March 8, 2024. The call came in on a Tuesday morning at 06:47 hours. Sarah Martinez, a neighbor living about 12 miles down the Richardson Highway near milepost 287, had contacted our dispatch about a welfare check request. She explained that she hadn't seen any activity at the Hendricks place for almost 3 weeks. No smoke from the chimney, no vehicle movement, and no response to her attempts to contact them by phone. What made Sarah's concern more urgent was the nature of the Hendricks family situation. Tom Hendricks, 41 years old, was going through a bitter custody dispute with his ex-wife Jennifer over their 2 children, Emma, age 8, and Michael, age 6. According to Sarah, Tom had been living in the remote cabin with the kids since January, after a court order granted him temporary custody while the divorce proceedings continued. Sarah had been checking on them regularly because Tom was new to Alaska wilderness living. He'd moved up from Phoenix just 18 months ago, drawn by work opportunities in the oil industry, but he had zero experience with the challenges of maintaining a homestead during an Alaskan winter. Sarah, who'd been living in the area for 15 years, had been helping him learn basic survival skills: how to maintain his generator, keep his pipes from freezing, and manage his wood-burning stove during the brutal cold snaps we'd been experiencing. I tried calling his landline every day for the past week, Sarah told our dispatcher. The phone rings, but nobody answers. And, officer, I can see his cabin from my kitchen window with binoculars. There's been no smoke from the chimney for at least 10 days. With these temperatures, if their heat source failed, they would have frozen to death by now. The weather conditions that week had been particularly severe, even by Alaska standards. We'd had a cold snap that kept temperatures below -30 for 8 straight days, with wind chills dropping to -60. The kind of cold that kills exposed skin in minutes and can freeze fuel lines in vehicles that aren't properly winterized. I was assigned to respond to the welfare check along with Trooper Lisa Chen, who had more experience with remote area emergency calls. Our protocol for these situations was straightforward: attempt contact, assess the situation, provide emergency assistance if needed, and document everything thoroughly. But given the custody situation and the isolation of the location, we prepared for the possibility that we might be dealing with a domestic violence incident, a murder-suicide, or deaths from exposure. The drive to the Hendricks cabin took us 47 minutes from our Fairbanks post, following the Richardson Highway north, then turning onto a series of increasingly primitive access roads. The final 3 miles required 4-wheel drive through snow that hadn't been plowed since the last major storm. Tom's cabin was situated on 40 acres of mixed forest and meadowland, completely isolated from other residences except for Sarah's place, which was barely visible through the trees. As we approached the cabin, several things immediately struck me as wrong. First, Sarah had been correct about the chimney. There was no smoke, which meant no heat source was operating. Second, Tom's pickup truck was parked beside the cabin, covered with snow that suggested it hadn't been moved in weeks. Third, and most disturbing, there were no footprints or any other signs of human activity in the snow around the buildings. But what made my blood run cold was what we could see through the cabin's front windows. The interior lights were on, and through the glass I could clearly observe what appeared to be a family dinner in progress. The dining room table was set for 4 people, with plates, glasses, and serving dishes arranged as if a meal was being served. Steam was rising from the food, indicating it was hot and freshly prepared. Trooper Chen and I exchanged glances. "That doesn't make sense," she said quietly. "If they've been missing for weeks, who's cooking dinner?" We approached the cabin, following standard safety protocols. I took the front entrance while Chen positioned herself at the back door to prevent anyone from escaping if this turned out to be a hostage situation or active domestic violence call. The front door was unlocked, which was unusual for people living in such a remote location. "Alaska State Troopers," I called out as I opened the door. "Tom Hendricks, this is Trooper Kellerman. We're here for a welfare check. Please respond if you can hear me." No answer, but the scene inside the cabin was even more disturbing than what we'd observed through the windows. The dining room table was indeed set for 4 people, with a complete family dinner laid out. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, dinner rolls, and what appeared to be homemade apple pie. The food was not only warm, it was steaming hot, as if it had just been removed from the oven. But there was nobody in the cabin. No Tom, no Emma, no Michael. The entire structure was empty of human presence, yet showed every sign of active occupation. The wood stove was burning strongly, maintaining a comfortable temperature throughout the building. Lights were on in every room. The television in the living room was playing a children's cartoon at low volume. Fresh coffee was brewing in the kitchen, and the automatic timer on the oven showed that something had been baking as recently as 30 minutes ago. I radioed Chen to report the situation. "Lisa, we have an unoccupied residence, but signs of very recent activity. The family is not present, but dinner is on the table and still hot. I'm going to conduct a room-by-room search." The cabin was larger than it had appeared from outside, a main living area with kitchen and dining room, 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and a basement storage area. Each room showed the same pattern, clear evidence of recent occupation, but no people. The master bedroom had unmade beds with sheets that were still warm to the touch. The children's rooms contained toys scattered on the floors as if Emma and Michael had been playing there minutes earlier. Clean laundry was folded on the beds, waiting to be put away. In the bathroom, I found toothbrushes that were still damp, towels hanging on hooks that hadn't had time to dry completely, and a bathtub with water in it that was still warm. Someone had taken a bath very recently, but there was no one in the cabin to account for these conditions. The kitchen provided the most disturbing evidence. Dirty dishes in the sink suggested that a family breakfast had been consumed that morning. Fresh groceries were stored in the refrigerator, including milk with an expiration date 5 days in the future, and bread that was soft and fresh. The coffee maker had a timer setting that would have started brewing at 6:30 a.m., just over an hour before we arrived. But it was the dining room that contained the detail that made this situation truly inexplicable. The table was set for 4 people, with each place setting showing signs of use. Napkins were unfolded and placed in lapse position. Silverware had been used to cut and eat food. Glasses contained beverages at various levels of consumption. Most significantly, the plates contained partially eaten meals, as if each family member had been interrupted in the middle of dinner and simply vanished. I photographed everything while Chen conducted an exterior search for footprints, tire tracks, or any indication of how 4 people could have left their cabin without leaving traces in the snow. Her search revealed something that defied logical explanation. There were no footprints leading away from the cabin. None. The snow around the building was undisturbed except for our own tracks from arriving. "Mike," Chen radioed from outside. "I've searched the entire perimeter. No tracks leading away from the building, no sign that a vehicle other than the pickup truck has been here. Recently, the snow cover suggests nothing has been disturbed for at least a week, maybe longer." I continued my interior search, looking for any clues about what had happened to the family. In Tom's bedroom, I found his wallet containing cash and credit cards, his cell phone plugged into a charger, and his winter clothing hanging in the closet. If Tom had left voluntarily, he would have taken these essential items with him, especially in winter conditions where proper clothing could mean the difference between life and death. The children's belongings told the same story. Emma's backpack was packed for school with completed homework assignments dated from 2 weeks ago. Michael's favorite stuffed animal was on his bed, something a 6-year-old would never voluntarily leave behind. Both children had winter coats, boots, and hats stored in the front closet, indicating they had not dressed for outdoor travel. But the most chilling discovery came when I examined the family's daily routine more closely. There was a calendar on the kitchen wall where Tom had been tracking his custody schedule and marking important dates. The last entry was from February 20th, over 2 weeks ago, noting Emma's school project due. But according to the evidence in the cabin, the family's daily activities had continued well beyond that date. Fresh entries appeared in a journal that Tom kept for documenting his children's activities, written in his handwriting, describing events that had supposedly occurred over the past 2 weeks. Entries like February 26th, Emma helped me fix the generator. Michael caught his first fish through the ice. And March 3rd, made pancakes for Sunday breakfast. Kids played in the snow all afternoon. The problem was that according to Sarah's testimony and our investigation timeline, the family had stopped all external communication on February 20th. Yet Tom's journal contained detailed entries describing normal family life continuing for 2 weeks after they had last been seen by anyone outside the cabin. I called for backup and requested a forensics team, but given our remote location and the weather conditions, we were looking at least 4 hours before additional units could reach us. Meanwhile, Chen and I had to secure the scene and continue our investigation. That's when we made the discovery that transformed this from a missing persons case into something that defied rational explanation. In the basement, we found evidence that the family had been preparing for an extended stay at the cabin. Cases of canned food, stored water, emergency medical supplies, and winter survival gear were neatly organized on shelves. But mixed in with these supplies were items that made no sense in the context of a remote Alaskan cabin. There were tropical fruits, fresh pineapples, mangoes, and papayas that could not have been purchased anywhere in Alaska during winter, let alone transported to this remote location. There were flowers, fresh cut roses and tulips, arranged in vases as if for a special occasion. Most disturbing was a collection of children's artwork, drawings by Emma and Michael that depicted events and locations that could not have occurred at the isolated cabin. Emma's drawings showed family trips to beaches, amusement parks, and cities with tall buildings. Michael's artwork depicted zoo animals, circus performers, and carnival rides. These were detailed, elaborate drawings that would have taken hours to complete, yet they were dated with recent dates that fell within the period when the family had supposedly been missing. When I examined the artwork more closely, I realized that the children had been drawing memories or experiences, but not memories of life in Alaska. The drawings depicted a warm, tropical environment where the family was together, happy, and engaged in activities that would be impossible during an Alaskan winter in a remote cabin. The final piece of evidence that convinced me we were dealing with something beyond normal police work came when I checked the cabin's communication systems. Tom had a landline phone, a cell phone, and a satellite internet connection for emergency communications. All three systems were operational and showed usage logs that indicated they had been used regularly throughout the period when the family was supposedly missing. The phone logs showed outgoing calls to pizza delivery services, movie theaters, and recreational facilities, all in Arizona, near Phoenix, where Tom had lived before moving to Alaska. The calls were made during the past 2 weeks, after the family had stopped responding to welfare check attempts. Moreover, the satellite internet usage logs showed online activity consistent with the family researching vacation destinations, booking hotel reservations, and purchasing airline tickets. But here's what made this evidence impossible to explain. All of the online activity related to travel plans for locations in tropical climates during the exact time period when the family should have been trapped in their isolated Alaskan cabin during the worst cold snap in years. By the time the forensics team arrived that evening, Chen and I had documented over 200 photographs and collected evidence that painted a picture of a family living a double life. They appeared to be simultaneously present in their remote Alaskan cabin, maintaining daily routines and preparing regular meals, while also traveling to tropical locations and engaging in activities that would require them to be thousands of miles away. The forensics team's analysis revealed additional layers of impossibility. Fingerprints throughout the cabin matched Tom, Emma, and Michael Hendricks, and the prints were fresh, some estimated to be less than 6 hours old. DNA analysis of hair samples, saliva traces, and skin cells confirmed that all three family members had been present in the cabin very recently. But soil samples from the basement revealed sand and organic matter consistent with tropical beaches. Water samples from the plumbing system contained minerals and chemical compositions that matched municipal water systems in Phoenix, Arizona, not the well water that supplied the remote cabin. Food residue analysis showed that the family had been consuming meals prepared with ingredients that were only available in warm climate regions. The investigation expanded to include contact with authorities in Arizona. Phoenix police confirmed that the Hendricks family had been seen at various locations throughout the city during the exact same time period when they were supposedly missing in Alaska. Hotel records showed them checking into resort accommodations. Restaurant receipts documented family meals. Security camera footage from shopping centers and tourist attractions clearly showed Tom, Emma, and Michael Hendricks engaging in normal vacation activities. But simultaneously, evidence from the Alaskan cabin proved that they had never left. The continuous operation of heating systems, the preparation of daily meals, the ongoing maintenance of the property, and the physical evidence of their presence all confirmed that the family had been living in the cabin throughout the same time period when they were documented to be in Arizona. The case file grew to over 400 pages as we attempted to reconcile evidence that showed the same three people living completely separate lives in two locations that were over 2,000 miles apart. Expert analysis confirmed that this was not a case of mistaken identity, fraudulent documents, or twin siblings. The evidence clearly showed that Tom, Emma, and Michael Hendricks were living simultaneously in both locations. Medical examination of items from the cabin revealed something that challenged our understanding of human biology. Hair samples contained cellular structures that showed signs of existence in multiple environmental conditions simultaneously. The hair had been exposed to both extreme cold conditions, consistent with Alaskan winter, and tropical humidity levels that could only occur in warm climates. Clothing fibers contained pollen from plants that grew exclusively in Arizona desert environments, but also ice crystals and mineral deposits that could only form during extended exposure to sub-zero temperatures. The evidence suggested that the family's physical bodies were somehow experiencing both environments at the same time. 3 months later, Tom Hendricks contacted Alaskan State Troopers from Phoenix to report that he and his children were safe and had been living in Arizona since February. He had no memory of the events documented at the Alaskan cabin and insisted that they had never been missing. When investigators showed him photographs and evidence from the cabin, he claimed that someone must have been impersonating his family. But DNA testing confirmed that the evidence from the cabin belonged to Tom and his children. Handwriting analysis verified that Tom's journal entries were authentic. Video footage from security cameras in the cabin showed clear images of the family living their daily routines throughout the period when Tom claimed they were in Arizona. The Hendricks cabin remains under investigation. Motion sensors and security cameras continue to detect activity consistent with family occupation. Meals appear on the dining room table at regular intervals. The heating system operates automatically. Children's voices can be heard on audio monitoring equipment, but no physical forms are ever captured on video. Local indigenous communities have reported similar phenomena at other remote homesteads throughout Alaska. Families who appear to be living normal lives in locations where they cannot possibly be present. Children playing in areas where no children live. Warm meals being prepared in cabins that have been abandoned for years. The official report on the Hendricks case has been classified due to the inexplicable nature of the evidence. But those of us who investigated the scene know that somewhere between the isolation of Alaska's wilderness and the warmth of more comfortable climates, some families have found ways to exist in multiple realities simultaneously. Because when the cold gets deep enough and the isolation becomes complete enough, the boundaries between what is real and what should be real start to dissolve. And sometimes missing families aren't really missing at all. They're just living somewhere that exists parallel to the place where we're looking for them. The Hendricks cabin still produces warm meals every evening at 6:30 p.m. The table is still set for 4. And somewhere, Tom, Emma, and Michael are still sitting down to dinner together, existing in a place where the Alaska winter never ends. But the warmth of family connection makes the cold irrelevant. But we never found them. And we never will. Because some missing persons cases lead to locations that don't exist on any map, but are more real than the places we call home. 20 years of highway patrol work teaches you to recognize when something doesn't belong. A deer in the wrong season, skid marks that tell impossible stories, or drivers whose reactions don't match the situation they claim to be experiencing. I'm Trooper Kevin Walsh, and on the night of November 15th, 2024, I encountered all 3. The call came through at 03:11 hours during what the Weather Service was calling life-threatening conditions, a designation they don't use lightly in Alaska. I was positioned in my patrol vehicle at mile marker 134 on the Parks Highway, about 30 miles south of Fairbanks, watching for stranded motorists and ice-related accidents during a storm that had already claimed 2 lives that evening. Unit 47. We have a possible injury accident at mile marker 137 northbound lanes. Dispatch crackled through the radio. Reporting party is a Doty snowplow operator who observed a vehicle that appears to have struck the guardrail and rolled. Single occupant visible, possibly conscious but non-responsive to the plow driver's attempts at contact. Standard protocol in these conditions required me to request backup and emergency medical. But with visibility near zero and roads that were claiming vehicles faster than tow trucks could clear them, response times were running over an hour. I acknowledged the call and began the careful drive north, using my spotlight to cut through snow that was falling so heavily it created a moving wall of white in front of my headlights. The scene I found at mile marker 137 defied every assumption I developed about accident dynamics over 2 decades of highway patrol. A late-model blue Honda Civic had indeed struck the guardrail, but the damage pattern was wrong for the road conditions and physics of the impact site. The vehicle had hit the barrier head-on at what appeared to be high speed, but the guardrail showed impact damage that had been weathered by months or possibly years of exposure to Alaska's elements. More disturbing was the vehicle's position. It sat perfectly upright against the damaged guardrail, as if it had gently come to rest there, rather than experiencing the violent, tumbling motion that should have followed a high-speed barrier impact. The Honda's front end was completely destroyed, the hood crushed back to the windshield, but the passenger compartment remained intact with all windows unbroken except for spiderweb patterns in the windshield that suggested head impact from the inside. I approached the vehicle following standard accident response procedures, but immediately noticed details that challenged the timeline reported by the snowplow driver. The Honda was covered with snow, but not the light dusting that would have accumulated during the few minutes since the accident was reported. The vehicle was buried under at least 8 inches of snow that would have required hours of steady accumulation. When I reached the driver's side window, I found a man approximately 40 years old, conscious and apparently uninjured, sitting behind the wheel with his hand still gripping the steering wheel. He was staring straight ahead through the shattered windshield, blinking occasionally, but not responding to my presence despite the fact that I was shining my flashlight directly at him and tapping on the window. "Sir, this is Alaska State Trooper Walsh," I called through the glass. "Are you injured? Can you hear me?" The driver turned to look at me, and his expression was one of complete confusion, as if he was trying to understand not just my words, but my presence at the accident scene. He rolled down the window manually. The car's electrical system appeared to be dead, and spoke in a voice that was perfectly calm despite his circumstances. "Officer, I need to report an accident," he said, as if he were calling from home rather than sitting in a demolished vehicle. I was driving north on the Parks Highway when I hit black ice near mile marker 137. My car struck the guardrail. I think I might need a tow truck. I studied his face for signs of head trauma, shock, or disorientation that might explain his disconnection from the severity of his situation. But his pupils were normal, his speech was clear, and he showed no obvious signs of injury. However, his clothing and the interior of his vehicle contained details that didn't match the current circumstances. The man was wearing a light jacket appropriate for autumn weather, not the heavy winter clothing necessary for survival in the current conditions. His car's interior showed no evidence of preparation for winter travel. No emergency supplies, no extra clothing, no food or water. Most significantly, the vehicle's registration and insurance documents, visible on the dashboard, showed the current dates, but the style and format of the paperwork appeared to be from decades earlier. "Sir, what's your name and where were you heading tonight?" I asked while documenting the scene with my body camera and taking photographs of the damage. "Tom Morrison," he replied. "I'm driving from Anchorage to Fairbanks for a job interview tomorrow morning. I have an appointment at 9 a.m. with Northern Construction Company." I knew Northern Construction Company well. They'd been one of Fairbanks' major employers until they went out of business in 2005. But Tom Morrison spoke about his appointment as if it were a current obligation, not a job interview for a company that had been defunct for nearly 20 years. "Mr. Morrison, what's today's date?" I asked, beginning to suspect I was dealing with a head injury that was affecting his perception of time and circumstances. "November 15th, 2004, he answered without hesitation. "I left Anchorage around 11 p.m. to get to Fairbanks early for my interview." The hair on my arm stood up. Tom Morrison was giving me the exact date, but 20 years in the past. More disturbing was that his certainty about the date matched his certainty about everything else. He wasn't confused or disoriented. He was simply existing in a different time frame than the rest of us. I ran his driver's license through our system using my mobile data terminal, and the results were both confirming and impossible. Tom Morrison, age 38, had indeed held a valid Alaska driver's license with an address in Anchorage. But according to state records, Tom Morrison had died in a single-vehicle accident on the Parks Highway near mile marker 137 on November 15, 2004. The accident report described circumstances identical to what I was observing. A northbound Honda Civic that struck the guardrail during a severe winter storm, resulting in the death of the driver. But Tom Morrison was sitting in front of me, alive, conscious, and completely unaware that he had been dead for 20 years. I radioed for backup and requested a supervisor, but given the weather conditions and the bizarre nature of the situation, I needed to conduct a more thorough investigation before additional units could reach the scene. I asked Tom to step out of his vehicle so I could assess his condition and determine whether he needed medical attention. Tom complied without hesitation, but when he opened the car door, several impossible things became apparent simultaneously. First, the temperature inside his vehicle was warm and comfortable, despite the fact that the engine was not running and the electrical system was dead. Second, when Tom stepped out into the storm, he showed no reaction to the extreme cold that should have been immediately life-threatening given his inappropriate clothing. Most disturbing was what happened to the vehicle when Tom was no longer inside it. The Honda's damaged front end began to show increasing signs of age and weather damage. The paint started to fade visibly. Rust spots appeared around the impact areas, and the interior materials began to show the kind of deterioration that occurs after years of exposure to Alaska's climate. "Mr. Morrison," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I need you to tell me everything you remember about your drive tonight." Tom's account was detailed and consistent, but it described road conditions, weather patterns, and traffic levels that matched historical data from November 15, 2004, not current conditions. He mentioned passing specific landmarks that had been removed or modified years ago, seeing road construction at locations where projects had been completed decades earlier, and encountering other vehicles on roads that were currently empty due to the storm. "I remember seeing a lot of construction equipment near Wasilla," Tom said. "They're working on expanding that section of a highway, and there was a truck stop that was really busy for this time of night." The highway expansion he described had been completed in 2006. The truck stop had been closed since 2010, but Tom's memories of these locations were vivid and detailed, as if he had encountered them just hours earlier. As we spoke, I noticed that Tom's vehicle continued to deteriorate. The snow covering the Honda was changing from fresh powder to the kind of packed, icy accumulation that builds up over months of winter weather. The guardrail damage was showing increasing signs of age, with rust patterns and metal fatigue that suggested the impact had occurred years earlier. When I examined Tom's personal belongings, his wallet, cell phone, and travel documents, I found additional evidence that he was somehow displaced in time. His cell phone was a model that had been discontinued in 2005. His credit cards showed expiration dates from 2006 and 2007. Most significantly, his wallet contained photographs of family members who appeared to be 20 years younger than they would be today. I contacted our dispatch and requested they run a background check on Tom Morrison's family members and emergency contacts. The results were heartbreaking. Tom's wife, Linda Morrison, had remarried in 2008 and was currently living in Seattle with her second husband. His 2 children, who would now be adults, had both moved to the lower 48 after graduating college. According to the records, the Morrison family had held a funeral service for Tom in 2004 and had moved on with their lives decades ago. But none of this information seemed to register with Tom when I explained it to him. He insisted that Linda was waiting for him to call her with an update on his interview, and that his children, who he described as being 8 and 10 years old, were expecting him to return home with news about the family's possible move to Fairbanks. "Officer, I appreciate your concern," Tom said patiently, "but I think there's been some kind of mix-up with your computer systems. I just need to get my car towed so I can rent another vehicle and make it to my interview on time." The arrival of my backup unit added another witness to what was becoming the most inexplicable situation I'd encountered in my law enforcement career. Trooper Sarah Mitchell had 25 years of experience and a reputation for level-headed assessment of unusual situations. When she arrived at the scene, I briefed her on the circumstances while Tom waited patiently beside his deteriorating vehicle. "Dan," Sarah said quietly after examining the evidence, "I've seen head trauma cases that cause temporal disorientation, but nothing like this. The physical evidence supports his version of events, but from a timeline that doesn't exist anymore." Sarah's investigation revealed additional layers of impossibility. When she ran the vehicle's VIN number through our database, the Honda Civic showed as having been totaled in an accident on November 15, 2004, and subsequently sold to a salvage yard where it was dismantled for parts. According to the official records, the vehicle Tom Morrison was driving had been destroyed 20 years ago. But we could both see and touch the car. We could photograph it, document its condition, and verify its physical presence at the accident scene. The Honda existed in our current reality, but according to every official record, it should not have existed anywhere. As the night progressed, Tom's disconnect from current reality became more pronounced. He began asking about people and places that no longer existed, describing his job in Anchorage with a company that had been bought out and dissolved years earlier, and making references to current events from 2004 as if they were recent news. "I'm worried about missing too much work," Tom explained. "We're really busy right now with the preparations for the 2004 election results, and my supervisor doesn't like people taking time off during important news cycles." Tom worked for a newspaper that had been shut down in 2007. The 2004 election he was referring to had occurred 20 years ago, but his concern about missing work was genuine and immediate, as if these 20-year-old obligations were current responsibilities. The most disturbing development came when Sarah attempted to contact Tom's listed emergency contacts. The phone numbers in his wallet were no longer in service, which was expected given the passage of time. But when she called directory assistance to locate current contact information for Linda Morrison, the operator reported something that should have been impossible. "Ma'am," the operator told Sarah, "I show a Linda Morrison at that address, but our records indicate the number has been disconnected due to the death of the account holder. The disconnection date is listed as November 16, 2004. According to the phone company's records, Linda Morrison had canceled her phone service the day after Tom's fatal accident, 20 years ago. But our investigation had confirmed that Linda Morrison was alive and living in Seattle. The discrepancy suggested that official records were somehow reflecting the timeline that Tom was experiencing, rather than current reality. We decided to transport Tom to the hospital for medical evaluation, but when we attempted to move him away from his vehicle, something unprecedented occurred. As the distance between Tom and the Honda increased, both Tom and the car began to fade visually, becoming translucent and increasingly difficult to see clearly. When Tom reached approximately 50 feet from the vehicle, he stopped walking and looked around with obvious confusion. "Officer," he said, "I think I'm lost. I don't remember how I got here, and I don't recognize this area." Sarah and I exchanged glances. Tom's demeanor had changed completely. Instead of the calm, focused individual who had been discussing his job interview, he now appeared disoriented and frightened. More significantly, when we looked back at the Honda Civic, it was no longer visible at the accident scene. We immediately returned to the location where the vehicle had been, but found only the damaged guardrail and impact marks in the snow. The Honda had vanished completely, leaving behind only the evidence of the collision, But as we approached the impact site, Tom became more agitated and confused. "I remember hitting something," he said, touching the damaged guardrail. "I was driving to Fairbanks for a job interview, and I hit black ice right here. My car went into the guardrail and then—" Tom's voice trailed off, and he stared at the impact site with growing recognition. "Officer, I think I was in an accident, a bad one. But I don't understand what happened to my car or how much time has passed." Sarah and I documented everything we could about the scene, but the physical evidence was limited to the guardrail damage and impact marks that could have been from any accident. We had no proof that Tom Morrison had been present except for our own testimony and the photographs we had taken, which showed a man standing next to empty space where his vehicle should have been. The medical evaluation at Fairbanks Memorial Hospital revealed that Tom Morrison was in perfect health with no signs of injury, trauma, or any medical condition that could explain his temporal displacement. But the hospital's record search uncovered something that added another layer of mystery to an already impossible situation. According to hospital records, Tom Morrison had been brought to Fairbanks Memorial on November 15, 2004, following a fatal traffic accident on the park's highway. He had been pronounced dead on arrival, and his body had been released to a funeral home for burial services. But the medical examiner's report from 2004 contained a notation that had been overlooked for 20 years. The body delivered to the hospital did not match the physical description of Tom Morrison found in his driver's license and identification documents. The accident victim in 2004 had been approximately 20 years older than Tom Morrison's licensed age, with physical characteristics that suggested significant aging beyond what his birth date would indicate. At the time, the discrepancy had been attributed to documentation errors and the effects of trauma, but in light of current circumstances, it suggested that something unusual had occurred during the original accident investigation. Tom remained at the hospital for observation while we attempted to locate his family members and determine the best course of action. But when we contacted Linda Morrison in Seattle, her response raised additional questions about the nature of Tom's situation. "Officers," Linda said during our phone conversation, "Tom has been dead for 20 years. We had a funeral, we buried him, and I've moved on with my life. I don't know what kind of hoax this is, but I'm not interested in participating." When we arranged for Linda to speak with Tom directly via phone, her reaction was immediate and emotional. "That's his voice," she whispered after just a few words. "That's exactly how he sounded 20 years ago, but this is impossible." The conversation between Tom and Linda was heartbreaking to witness. Tom spoke to his wife as if he had seen her just days earlier, asking about their children's school activities and discussing plans for the family's potential move to Fairbanks if he got the construction job. Linda, meanwhile, was trying to explain 20 years of life changes, the children's graduations and marriages, and her own remarriage and relocation. "Tom," Linda said through tears, "our daughter Emily is 28 years old now. She's married and has 2 children. Our son David is 30. They both live in the lower 48. I remarried in 2008. You've been gone for 20 years. Tom's response revealed the extent of his temporal displacement. His voice, mannerisms, and intimate knowledge of family details matched Linda's memories of her husband from 20 years earlier. Over the following weeks, we attempted to develop a logical explanation for Tom Morrison's appearance at the accident scene. The investigation expanded to include consultation with medical experts, psychologists, and even physicists who specialized in temporal mechanics theories. But no conventional explanation could account for the evidence we had documented. Tom remained in protective custody while officials decided how to handle his legal status. According to official records, he was dead and had been buried 20 years earlier, but he was physically present, mentally competent, and clearly the same individual who had died in the 2004 accident. His legal existence created bureaucratic problems that had no precedent in Alaska state law. The most disturbing development came 6 weeks after the initial incident, when the Alaska State Medical Examiner requested permission to exhume Tom Morrison's grave to verify the identity of the body that had been buried in 2004. The exhumation revealed an empty casket with no trace of human remains, despite funeral home records that documented the burial of Tom Morrison's body following the 2004 accident. But the mystery deepened when we discovered that similar incidents had been occurring throughout Alaska for decades. State records contained reports of accident victims who had been found at the scenes of fatal crashes years or even decades after their deaths were officially documented. In each case, the individuals showed no awareness of the passage of time and believed they were experiencing the immediate aftermath of their accidents. These cases were typically classified as psychological phenomena or mistaken identity situations, but the pattern was too consistent to dismiss as coincidence. Alaska's harsh weather conditions and isolated highways appeared to be creating circumstances where accident victims became displaced in time, reliving their final moments over and over again without awareness of their deaths or the passage of years. The official resolution of Tom Morrison's case was handled through administrative channels that sealed most of the documentation due to the sensitive nature of the circumstances. Tom was provided with temporary identification documents and social services support while officials determined his legal status. But 3 months after his appearance at the accident scene, Tom Morrison disappeared from the halfway house where he had been staying. Security cameras at the facility showed Tom leaving the building on foot at 11:47 p.m., walking in the direction of the park's highway. He was never seen again, but highway patrol officers reported several sightings over the following months of a man matching Tom's description, walking along the shoulder of the park's highway near mile marker 137, always during severe weather conditions and always disappearing when officers stopped to offer assistance. The last confirmed sighting came exactly 1 year after Tom's initial appearance, on November 15, 2025. A snowplow driver reported seeing a blue Honda Civic against the guardrail at mile marker 137 with a male driver who appeared to be conscious but non-responsive. When highway patrol units responded to the call, they found only the damaged guardrail and no sign of any vehicle or occupant. But embedded in the guardrail metal was a business card for Northern Construction Company with an appointment notification for Tom Morrison, scheduled for 9 a.m. on November 16, 2004. The business card was pristine, as if it had been placed there moments earlier, but Northern Construction Company had been out of business for 20 years. Tom Morrison's case remains open in our files, but it's been reclassified as a recurring incident rather than a missing person investigation. Highway patrol officers working the park's highway near mile marker 137 have been briefed on the circumstances and instructed to document any similar encounters while treating them as routine traffic stops. Because sometimes accident victims don't realize they've died, and sometimes 20 years can pass in what feels like moments between impact and the aftermath. The park's highway remembers every accident, every life lost, and every driver who never made it to their destination. And on nights when the weather turns deadly and visibility drops to zero, Tom Morrison is still driving north toward a job interview that happened 20 years ago, hitting the same patch of black ice, striking the same guardrail, and trying to understand why the officer who stops to help him keeps insisting that he's been dead for 2 decades. The crash happened once, but it never ended. Some accidents echo through time, and some highways become loops where the departed keep driving, unaware that their destinations no longer exist in the world the rest of us inhabit. Some tracks tell stories that shouldn't be possible to write. After 16 years with Alaska State Troopers, I thought I understood how to read sign in the wilderness, boot prints, drag marks, blood trails, and the dozens of other clues that missing persons leave behind when they disappear into Alaska's vast backcountry. I'm Trooper Chris Kowalski, and what I discovered during the search for Marcus Chen in October 2023 challenged everything I believed about tracking, terrain, and the laws of physics that govern where human beings can and cannot go. The missing person report came through our Anchorage dispatch at 14:23 hours on October 12, 2023. Marcus Chen, age 34, an experienced bow hunter from Fairbanks, had failed to return from a solo hunting trip in the Wrangell Mountains. His wife Jennifer had contacted us when Marcus missed his scheduled check-in time and failed to respond to repeated calls on his satellite communicator. Marcus Chen was not your typical weekend warrior who wandered into Alaska's wilderness unprepared. He held advanced wilderness survival certifications, had been hunting Alaska's backcountry for 12 years, and worked as a guide for trophy hunting expeditions during the summer months. His knowledge of the Wrangell Mountain region was encyclopedic. He had mapped every game trail, water source, and shelter location within a 50-mile radius of his favorite hunting areas. What made this particular hunt different was Marcus's target species. He had drawn a once-in-a-lifetime Dall sheep permit for Hunting Unit 11, a region known for producing record-class rams but requiring extreme technical climbing skills to access the sheep's habitat on cliff faces and narrow ledges thousands of feet above the valley floor. Marcus had been preparing for this hunt for 2 years, studying topographic maps, practicing with climbing equipment, and scouting the area during previous seasons. According to Jennifer, Marcus had left Fairbanks on October 8th with enough supplies for a 10-day hunt. His plan was to establish a base camp at approximately 4,200 feet elevation, then conduct daily hunts into the higher elevations where Dall sheep congregated during the rutting season. He carried a GPS unit, satellite communicator, emergency beacon, and had filed a detailed hunting plan with both his wife and the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. The search began immediately given Marcus's experience level and the potentially life-threatening weather conditions forecast for the region. The Wrangell Mountains in October can shift from clear skies to blizzard conditions within hours, and temperatures can drop 40 degrees between afternoon and evening. An experienced hunter might survive a few days of unexpected weather, but extended exposure would be fatal even for someone with Marcus's survival skills. I was assigned as the lead investigator due to my experience with backcountry search and rescue operations, and my familiarity with hunter behavior patterns in the Wrangell region. My first step was to interview Jennifer Chen to establish Marcus's exact route, timeline, and mental state when he departed for the hunt. Jennifer provided detailed information that painted a picture of a methodical, well-prepared hunter who had left nothing to chance. Marcus had shown her his intended route on topographic maps, demonstrated the operation of his satellite communicator, and established a rigid schedule for daily check-ins at 6 p.m. He had never missed a scheduled communication during 12 years of solo hunting trips. Marcus is obsessive about safety protocols, Jennifer explained during our interview. He carries backup equipment for everything, studies weather forecasts for weeks before trips, and has never taken unnecessary risks. If he's not responding to communication attempts, something has prevented him from using his equipment. The search area encompassed approximately 120 square miles of some of Alaska's most challenging terrain. Elevations ranged from 2,000 feet in the valley bottoms to over 8,000 feet on the peaks where Dall sheep habitat was located. The region included vertical cliff faces, unstable scree slopes, and narrow ridges that required technical climbing skills to traverse safely. I assembled a search team that included 2 other troopers with backcountry experience, a helicopter pilot familiar with mountain flying, and a civilian search and rescue specialist who had extensive knowledge of the Wrangell Mountains. Our plan was to follow Marcus's intended route from his vehicle to his planned base camp location, then expand the search to cover areas where he might have deviated from his original plan. Marcus's pickup truck was located exactly where Jennifer said it would be, parked at the trailhead for the Copper Creek access route at mile marker 42 on the Edgerton Highway. The truck was locked and secure, with no signs of forced entry or struggle. Marcus's non-essential gear was properly stored in the vehicle, and his hunting license and permits were displayed on the dashboard as required by law. The trail from the parking area to Marcus's intended base camp was clearly marked by his passage. Boot prints, matching the tread pattern of Marcus's hunting boots, were easily identifiable in the soft earth near the creek crossing. Game bags, rope, and other hunting equipment had been cached at strategic locations along the road, indicating that Marcus had made multiple trips to establish his hunting operation according to his planned timeline. We followed Marcus's trail for approximately 8 miles through mixed terrain that gradually increased in elevation and technical difficulty. His route selection was excellent, taking advantage of game trails and natural features to minimize energy expenditure while maintaining access to the sheep habitat above. Every aspect of his approach demonstrated the experience and planning that Jennifer had described. Marcus's base camp was located exactly where his hunting plan indicated it would be, positioned on a protected ledge with access to water and commanding views of the sheep habitat in the surrounding peaks. The camp was meticulously organized with his shelter, cooking equipment, and hunting gear arranged for efficiency and protection from weather. Nothing appeared to be disturbed or missing, but Marcus was not at the camp, and the evidence of his activities raised immediate questions about what had happened after he established his hunting base. His sleeping bag and personal gear indicated he had spent at least 2 nights at the location. Food consumption patterns suggested normal meal preparation through October 10th, but no evidence of meals after that date. Most significantly, we found Marcus's hunting equipment arranged as if he had been preparing for a hunt on the morning of October 11th. His bow was strung and ready for use, arrows were organized in his quiver, and his day pack was loaded with the gear necessary for a technical climb into sheep habitat. But his satellite communicator, which should have been with him during any hunt, was found at the base camp with the battery fully charged and no record of outgoing messages after his scheduled check-in on October 10th. The search team expanded our investigation to the areas above Marcus's base camp where Dall sheep sign was most concentrated. This required technical climbing equipment and advanced mountaineering skills, as the sheep habitat existed on cliff faces and narrow ledges that were accessible only through vertical or near vertical rock climbing. What we discovered during this phase of the search defied every principle of tracking and terrain analysis I had learned during 16 years of law enforcement work in Alaska's wilderness. Marcus's boot prints were clearly visible on a series of ledges and cliff faces that should have been impossible for any human to reach without specialized climbing equipment that he did not possess. The first impossible track appeared on a ledge approximately 600 feet above his base camp. The ledge was accessible only by a vertical rock climb that would require ropes, anchors, and advanced technical climbing skills. But Marcus's boot print was clearly visible in a patch of soft earth on the ledge, with the distinctive tread pattern and wear characteristics that matched prints from his known route. More disturbing was the fact that there was only one boot print on the ledge. Not a pair of prints that would indicate Marcus had stood or walked on the surface, but a single left boot print that appeared to have been made by someone passing through the area without putting weight on their right foot. The print was deep and clear, indicating significant downward pressure, but there was no corresponding right boot print anywhere on the ledge. Our team accessed the ledge using technical climbing equipment and confirmed that Marcus's boot print was genuine and recent. Soil analysis indicated the print had been made within the previous 72 hours, and the depth of the impression was consistent with the weight of an adult male carrying hunting equipment. But there was no evidence of how Marcus had reached the ledge or where he had gone after making the single footprint. The search team's climbing specialist, a man with over 20 years of mountaineering experience, examined the cliff face above and below the ledge for any signs of rope anchors, rappel points, or other evidence of technical climbing activity. He found nothing. The rock face showed no scratches, chalk marks, or wear patterns that would indicate human passage using climbing equipment. Trooper Kowalski, the specialist reported, "There is no way a human being reached that ledge without technical climbing gear. The rock face is vertical for over 200 feet below the ledge and overhanging for 100 feet above it. Even with advanced equipment and expert skills, accessing that location would be extremely difficult and would leave obvious signs of passage. But Marcus's boot print was undeniably present on the ledge, and our team discovered additional impossible tracks as we expanded the search to higher elevations. A series of boot prints appeared on cliff faces, narrow ridges, and rock formations that should have been inaccessible to human travel. Each print was clear, recent, and consistent with Marcus's boot tread pattern, but their locations violated basic principles of physics and human locomotion. The most disturbing discovery came when we found Marcus's tracks on a vertical cliff face 1,200 feet above the valley floor. The prints appeared to run horizontally across the cliff face for approximately 50 feet, as if Marcus had been walking on a vertical surface like it was level ground. The prints were deep and evenly spaced, indicating a normal walking gait, but they existed on a rock face that was completely vertical with no ledges, cracks, or features that could provide footing for human travel. Our helicopter pilot confirmed the impossibility of the situation by hovering directly beside the cliff face while I photographed the tracks from aircraft. The boot prints were clearly visible and recent, but they existed in locations where no human being could survive, let alone walk with a normal gait. "Chris," the pilot radioed, "I've been flying mountain rescues for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like this. Those prints are 1,200 feet up a sheer cliff face with no possible access route. It's like someone was walking on air." The tracking evidence became increasingly bizarre as we followed Marcus's impossible trail through the mountains. His boot prints appeared on narrow spires of rock that would collapse under human weight, crossed gaps between cliff faces that were hundreds of feet wide, and followed routes that led directly up vertical rock faces without any deviation for handholds or rest points. But the most chilling discovery was that Marcus's tracks were not random or chaotic. They followed a deliberate route that led consistently higher into the mountains, toward peaks that were technically impossible to reach without helicopter access or extensive technical climbing operations. The tracks suggested that Marcus was pursuing something, following a specific path toward a destination that existed far above the normal limits of human travel. On the third day of the search, we discovered evidence that Marcus had been hunting during his impossible journey through the mountains. Arrow shafts were embedded in rock faces at locations that matched his tracking route, indicating he had been shooting at targets while traversing terrain that should have killed him instantly. The arrows were positioned as if Marcus had been shooting horizontally while standing on vertical cliff faces. More disturbing was the condition of the arrows. They were embedded deep in solid rock, requiring impact force that was far beyond what any bow could generate. The arrows had penetrated granite and quartzite formations to depths of 6 to 8 inches, which would require industrial equipment rather than hunting archery to achieve. Recovery of the arrow shafts revealed that they contained biological material that was not consistent with Dall sheep or any other known wildlife in the region. Laboratory analysis of tissue and blood samples found on the arrows showed genetic markers that did not match any species in established databases. The biological material appeared to be from an animal that was significantly larger than Dall sheep and possessed physiological characteristics that did not correspond to known mammalian species. The search team expanded our investigation to include analysis of what Marcus might have been hunting during his impossible journey through the mountains. Game cameras positioned throughout the region had recorded no unusual wildlife activity, and traditional Dall sheep sign was limited to normal habitat areas far below the elevations where Marcus's tracks appeared. But aerial surveys of the higher elevations revealed disturbances in the snow and rock that suggested the presence of large animals in areas where no known species should be able to survive. Tracks and bedding sites appeared on narrow ledges and cliff tops that were accessible only to birds or aircraft, yet the sign indicated terrestrial mammals of significant size. The helicopter pilot reported visual sightings of large, light-colored animals moving on cliff faces and narrow ridges during our aerial searches. The animals appeared to be approximately the size of Dall sheep, but exhibited locomotion abilities that defied normal quadruped movement patterns. They were observed moving vertically up cliff faces and leaping between rock formations that were separated by hundreds of feet of empty space. Whatever Marcus was hunting, the pilot reported, it's not confined by normal animal movement limitations. I watched something the size of a bighorn sheep jump from one cliff face to another across a gap that was at least 300 feet wide. Our search team's tracking specialist made the most significant discovery on day 4 when he located what appeared to be Marcus's final campsite. The site was positioned on a narrow ledge approximately 2,400 feet above his original base camp, accessible only by following the impossible track route that we had been documenting throughout the search. The campsite contained Marcus's hunting equipment, personal gear, and evidence that he had spent at least one night at the location. His sleeping bag was laid out on the narrow ledge, with hunting equipment arranged nearby. Food preparation indicated he had consumed a normal meal, and his hunting journal contained entries describing successful tracking of what he called the high sheep. Marcus's journal entries from the impossible campsite provided insight into his mental state and objectives during the hunt, but they raised more questions than they answered. His writing was clear and rational, showing no signs of disorientation, altitude sickness, or psychological breakdown. But his descriptions of the hunt defied logical explanation. October 11th, successfully tracked the high sheep to elevation 6,800 feet. These animals exhibit climbing abilities that exceed anything in my previous hunting experience. They move vertically on cliff faces with no apparent effort and show no fear of heights that would be fatal to normal sheep. The hunt is more challenging than anticipated, but the trophy potential is extraordinary. October 12th, followed high sheep signed to 7,200 feet. Shot at mature ram from 60-yard range, but arrow passed through animal without apparent injury. Animal showed no reaction to impact and continued moving up vertical cliff face. Will adjust hunting strategy and try different arrow points. October 13th, made contact with high sheep herd at 7,800 feet. Animals communicated with vocalizations unlike normal sheep calls. Sounds were more complex, almost like language. When I attempted to get closer, entire herd moved straight up cliff face that was completely vertical. Following tomorrow with modified climbing approach. Marcus's final journal entry was dated October 14th, 3 days after his last communication with Jennifer. Successful kill at 8,200 feet elevation. High sheep ram, estimated 200 plus boon and Crockett score. Animal fell into crevice during recovery, lost trophy and most of meat. Will attempt to retrieve tomorrow by descending into crevice system. If unsuccessful, will return to base camp October 15th. weather holding, spirits high. But Marcus had never returned to his base camp, and our search team found no evidence of his presence at the crevice location described in his journal. The area he referenced was accessible only by technical climbing that was beyond the equipment capabilities he possessed, and the described terrain features did not match the topography of the surrounding mountains. The search operation expanded to include specialized cave rescue teams and advanced climbing specialists who could access the crevice systems in the higher elevations. But after 5 days of intensive searching using helicopters, technical climbers, and ground teams, we found no additional trace of Marcus Chen or evidence of his hunting activities beyond the impossible campsite. The final phase of the search focused on the biological evidence we had collected from Marcus's arrows and the unusual animal sign documented during the hunt. Laboratory analysis revealed that the tissue samples contained genetic material that was approximately 85% consistent with Dall sheep DNA, but included genetic sequences that were not found in any known mammalian species. The blood samples showed hemoglobin structures that would allow for oxygen processing at altitudes where normal mammals would suffocate, and muscle tissue analysis indicated strength characteristics that would enable movement on vertical surfaces. Most disturbing was evidence of neural tissue that showed complexity levels exceeding what was found in known sheep species. What Marcus was hunting, the wildlife biologist explained during the investigation briefing, appears to have been genetically related to Dall sheep, but adapted for survival in environments where normal mammals cannot exist. The tissue samples suggest animals that were physiologically capable of vertical movement, high-altitude survival, and possibly enhanced intelligence. The official search for Marcus Chen was suspended after 10 days due to weather conditions and the exhaustion of all logical search possibilities. Marcus was classified as missing and presumed dead, with the assumption that he had fallen from one of the technical climbing areas and his body had been lost in terrain that was inaccessible to recovery operations. But 6 months later, we received reports from other hunters in the Wrangell Mountains that suggested Marcus's story was not finished. Multiple hunting parties reported sightings of a human figure moving on cliff faces and narrow ridges at elevations where human survival should be impossible. The figure was observed at distances too great for positive identification, but appeared to be carrying hunting equipment and moving with purpose through terrain that required technical climbing abilities. More significantly, hunters began reporting encounters with Dall sheep that exhibited the unusual characteristics Marcus had described in his journal. Animals that moved vertically on cliff faces, communicated with complex vocalizations, and showed no fear of humans or hunting pressure. Several hunters reported successful shots at these animals that resulted in no apparent injury, as if arrows passed through them without causing physical damage. The Alaska Department of Fish and Game received multiple reports of unusual Dall sheep behavior throughout the Wrangell Mountain region during the 2024 hunting season. Hunters described animals that led them on extended chases through impossible terrain, sheep that appeared and disappeared without logical explanation, and hunting experiences that violated basic principles of animal behavior and physics. But the most disturbing reports came from hunters who claimed to have encountered Marcus Chen himself during their hunts. These sightings described a man matching Marcus's physical description, who was observed hunting at extreme elevations, moving through terrain that should have been fatal, and pursuing sheep that exhibited the unusual characteristics documented in our investigation. "I saw him through my binoculars," reported one hunter during our follow-up interviews. A guy with hunting gear at about 8,000 feet elevation, walking along a cliff face like it was level ground. When I tried to signal him with my whistle, he looked in my direction and waved, then continued moving up a vertical rock face. I watched him disappear over the top of a peak that would require helicopter access to reach. The current status of Marcus Chen remains officially listed as missing and presumed dead, but the accumulating evidence suggests that something unprecedented occurred during his October 2023 hunt in the Wrangell Mountains. Multiple witnesses, physical evidence, and documented animal behavior all support a conclusion that defies conventional explanation. Marcus appears to have encountered a species of Dall sheep that exists beyond the normal limitations of mammalian physiology. Animals that have adapted to survive in environments where ordinary sheep would perish instantly. His pursuit of these animals led him into terrain that should have been impossible for human travel. But somehow he adapted to the conditions and continued hunting at elevations where normal humans would suffocate or freeze to death within minutes. The tracking evidence suggests that Marcus achieved some form of physiological adaptation that allowed him to survive and hunt in the extreme mountain environment where these unusual sheep exist. His impossible tracks, successful arrow impacts on vertical cliff faces, and extended survival at extreme elevation all indicate that he underwent changes that enabled him to exist in conditions that would kill ordinary humans. Local indigenous communities have reported similar phenomena throughout Alaska's mountain regions for generations. Stories of hunters who pursue spirit animals into territories where humans cannot survive, eventually becoming something more than human themselves. These hunters are said to continue their eternal hunt in regions that exist parallel to our normal world, pursuing game that exists in the spaces between what is possible and what should be impossible. But the most haunting aspect of Marcus Chen's disappearance is the evidence that he achieved his objective. According to his journal, he successfully killed one of the high sheep before vanishing into the mountain terrain. Trophy hunting guides working in the Wrangell Mountains have reported finding evidence of recent hunting activities at extreme elevations, including field-dressed game and hunting camps positioned in locations that should be impossible to reach. Some tracks tell stories that shouldn't be possible to write, but Marcus Chen's trail leads to a conclusion that challenges everything we understand about the boundaries between human capability and the impossible demands of Alaska's most extreme wilderness. His hunt may have ended with the ultimate trophy, transformation into something that can survive and hunt in territories where ordinary humans perish, pursuing game that exists in the vertical world above the limits of normal life. The mountains remember every hunter who enters their domain, but sometimes they decide to keep the most dedicated ones as permanent residents in hunting grounds that exist beyond the reach of physics, altitude, and the limitations that define what humans can and cannot do. And somewhere in the Wrangell Mountains, Marcus Chen continues his hunt, pursuing impossible sheep through impossible terrain, leaving impossible tracks that tell the story of a man who went beyond the boundaries of human existence to achieve the hunt of a lifetime that will never end. Drug trafficking investigations in Alaska require patience, precision, and the ability to adapt when cases develop in unexpected directions. After 19 years with Alaska State Troopers, I believed I had encountered every possible variation of narcotic distribution schemes, from small-town meth labs to sophisticated international smuggling operations. I'm Trooper Janet Morrison, and what happened during Operation Arctic Pipeline in December 2023 taught me that some criminal investigations lead to places where conventional law enforcement procedures become meaningless. The investigation began 6 months earlier, when our narcotics unit identified an unusual pattern in drug seizures throughout south-central Alaska. High-purity heroin and fentanyl were appearing in remote communities that had no history of hard drug problems and no logical distribution networks to explain how the substances were reaching these isolated locations. The drugs were packaged professionally and showed chemical signatures consistent with international trafficking operations, But the supply chain didn't match any known criminal organizations operating in Alaska. What made this pattern particularly concerning was the demographics of the communities affected. These weren't typical drug markets with established user populations and distribution infrastructure. Instead, the drugs were appearing in villages with populations under 500, accessible only by bush plane or snowmobile with no apparent connection to larger criminal networks. Yet the quantity and quality of drugs being seized suggested a sophisticated operation with significant financial backing. My assignment to the investigation came through our joint task force with the Drug Enforcement Administration, which had identified Alaska as a potential transit route for Asian heroin entering the North American market. The working theory was that criminal organizations were using Alaska's vast wilderness and limited law enforcement presence to establish distribution networks that could move drugs to major population centers in Canada and the lower 48 states. The breakthrough in the case came from an unexpected source: a routine traffic violation in the tiny community of Glenallen, population 483, located at the intersection of the Glen and Richardson highways, approximately 180 miles northeast of Anchorage. On December 18, 2023, Trooper Mark Stevens conducted a traffic stop for expired registration tags on a white panel van traveling south toward Anchorage at 0237 hours. The van was occupied by 3 individuals who immediately raised suspicion due to their nervous behavior, conflicting stories about their travel plans, and the fact that they were traveling through a remote area during the early morning hours without any apparent legitimate purpose. The driver, identified as Robert Martinez, age 29, claimed they were traveling from Fairbanks to Anchorage for employment opportunities. The passengers, Maria Santos, age 26, and David Kim, age 31, provided different explanations for their journey when questioned separately. Trooper Stevens's field interview revealed several inconsistencies that justified a more detailed investigation. The van's registration was listed to an address in Seattle that didn't exist. The occupants carried identification from different states, but claimed to be traveling together as a family, and their luggage contained personal items that suggested they had been living in Alaska for an extended period, despite claiming to be recent arrivals. A K-9 unit was requested to conduct a narcotics search, and the dog alerted to the presence of controlled substances in the van's cargo area. The subsequent search revealed 47 kilograms of high-purity heroin hidden in professionally constructed concealment compartments, along with distribution materials, scales, cutting agents, and approximately $78,000 in cash organized in bundles consistent with drug trafficking operations. The 3 suspects were arrested and transported to our Glenallen holding facility while we processed the crime scene and began the investigation into what appeared to be a significant drug trafficking operation. The quantity of narcotics seized represented one of the largest heroin busts in Alaska state history, with an estimated street value exceeding $2.3 million. But the investigation took an unprecedented turn during the initial questioning of the suspects. All 3 individuals provided detailed information about a drug distribution network that operated throughout Alaska using methods that seemed impossible given the state's geography and law enforcement coverage. They described a system that could deliver drugs to any location in Alaska within 24 hours, regardless of weather conditions, accessibility, or seasonal transportation limitations. According to their statements, the distribution network used what they called direct delivery systems that bypassed normal transportation infrastructure. Drugs could be delivered to remote villages during blizzards, to locations that were inaccessible by aircraft or ground vehicles, and to customers who placed orders through communication methods that didn't rely on traditional phone or internet services. "We don't use planes, boats, or snowmobiles," Robert Martinez explained during his interview. "The organization has developed delivery methods that work in any weather, any season, any location in Alaska. Distance and accessibility are not factors in our distribution capabilities. When pressed for details about these delivery methods, the suspects provided information that suggested the organization operated using technology or techniques that were far beyond conventional drug trafficking operations. They described delivery systems that could transport drugs instantaneously across hundreds of miles, communication networks that functioned without electronic infrastructure, and distribution hubs that existed in locations that weren't accessible through normal means. Maria Santos's statement was particularly detailed. The main distribution center is located in a facility that you can't reach by following normal travel routes. It exists in a space that's connected to all locations in Alaska simultaneously. When customers place orders, the drugs are delivered directly to their location without requiring transport time. The suspects' descriptions of the organization's operations were so unusual that we initially assumed they were attempting to mislead the investigation or protect higher-level operatives by providing false information. But their statements were consistent, detailed, and delivered without the evasiveness typically associated with suspects trying to conceal criminal activities. David Kim provided the most specific information about the organization's structure and capabilities. The organization recruits people who are willing to work in locations that exist outside normal space. Employees live and work in the distribution facility, but they can access any location in Alaska instantly. Time and distance don't function the same way in the facility as they do in normal locations. We decided to hold the suspects in our secure transport vehicle while we conducted follow-up investigations to verify their claims and identify other members of the trafficking organization. The 3 individuals were placed in the rear compartment of our prisoner transport van, which was designed specifically for holding multiple suspects during extended investigations. The transport van was equipped with reinforced steel construction, tamper-proof locks, and monitoring systems that would detect any attempt to escape or interfere with the security systems. The rear compartment had no external access points, no removable panels, and no tools or materials that could be used to breach the security barriers. 2 officers were assigned to maintain constant surveillance of the vehicle. Our plan was to transport the suspects to Anchorage for processing by federal authorities while continuing the investigation into their trafficking organization. But at 1847 hours, approximately 4 hours after the suspects had been secured in the transport van, Officers Stevens and Chen reported something that had never occurred in the history of Alaska State Trooper prisoner transport operations. "Dispatch, this is Unit 23. Officer Stevens radioed. "We have a situation with our prisoner transport. The suspects are no longer in the vehicle." I was coordinating the investigation from our Glen Allen office when the radio call came through. My initial assumption was that the officers were reporting an escape attempt or medical emergency that had required removing the suspects from the transport van. But Stevens's follow-up communication indicated something far more serious. "The rear compartment is still locked and secure," Stevens continued. "All security systems show normal operation. But the 3 suspects who were placed in the vehicle 4 hours ago are no longer present. The compartment is empty." I immediately responded to the transport van location with additional units to assess the situation and determine how 3 suspects had escaped from a vehicle that was designed to be escape-proof. What I found challenged everything I understood about prisoner transport security and the physical limitations of steel construction. The transport van's rear compartment was indeed empty, but showed no signs of forced exit or security compromise. The locks were still engaged and could only be opened using keys that remained in the possession of the supervising officers. The steel walls, floor, and ceiling showed no evidence of cutting, drilling, or other attempts to create exit points. The monitoring systems had recorded no unusual activity during the 4 hours when the suspects should have been confined in the compartment. Most significantly, the suspects had left behind all of their personal property, including shoes, jackets, and jewelry that they had been wearing when placed in the transport van. Their belongings were arranged neatly on the bench seats as if they had been carefully removed and folded before the suspects disappeared. But the most puzzling evidence was what we found in place of the missing suspects. 3 handwritten notes were positioned where each suspect had been sitting, written in different handwriting styles but containing similar messages about the organization's operations and the suspects' new assignments within the trafficking network. Robert Martinez's note read, "Thank you for the temporary detention. My assignment with the organization required brief interaction with local law enforcement to provide information about our capabilities. I have been recalled to the distribution facility for reassignment to a different operational area." Maria Santos's note stated, "The interview process has been completed successfully. The information provided to your officers will be useful for understanding the scope of our distribution network. I am returning to work at the facility until needed for additional law enforcement contact." David Kim's note was the most specific. "Our organization appreciates the professional manner in which we were treated during this investigation. The drugs and money seized will be replaced automatically. We look forward to future cooperation with Alaska State Troopers when operational requirements necessitate additional information exchange." The handwriting analysis confirmed that each note had been written by the corresponding suspect, but the content suggested that their arrest and detention had been intentional rather than the result of a routine traffic enforcement operation. The notes implied that the suspects had deliberately allowed themselves to be arrested in order to provide information about their organization to law enforcement. But the method of their disappearance from a secured prisoner transport vehicle remained impossible to explain through conventional means. Security camera footage from the transport van showed the suspects sitting normally in the rear compartment until 1843 hours, when the cameras briefly malfunctioned for approximately 30 seconds. When the cameras resumed normal operation, the compartment was empty with the suspects' clothing and personal effects arranged as we had found them. The investigation expanded to include consultation with federal authorities, security specialists, and even magicians who were experts in escape techniques. No one could provide a logical explanation for how 3 people had exited a sealed steel compartment without leaving physical evidence of their escape method. Analysis of the transport van revealed several anomalies that challenged our understanding of what had occurred during the 4 hours when the suspects were supposedly confined. The vehicle's interior temperature had remained at exactly 68 degrees Fahrenheit, despite the fact that the heating system was not operational, and outside temperatures were below freezing. The air quality inside the compartment showed oxygen levels that were higher than normal atmospheric concentrations, as if the space had been supplied with enhanced life support systems. Most disturbing was the discovery that the rear compartment's internal dimensions had somehow changed during the period when the suspects were present. Measurements taken after their disappearance showed that the compartment was approximately 2 feet longer and 1 foot wider than the specifications in the vehicle's construction documentation. The additional space had vanished along with the suspects, returning the compartment to its original dimensions. The forensic analysis of evidence left behind by the suspects revealed information that supported their claims about operating a distribution network with unprecedented capabilities. DNA analysis of hair and skin samples found in the transport van showed genetic markers that were consistent with individuals who had been exposed to environmental conditions that don't exist anywhere on Earth. The suspects' blood samples, obtained during the booking process, contained chemical compounds that were not found in any known pharmaceutical or recreational drugs. Laboratory analysis indicated that their blood chemistry had been modified to allow survival in atmospheric conditions with altered oxygen concentrations, temperature ranges, and pressure levels that would be fatal to normal humans. What you're dealing with, the FBI laboratory specialist explained during our briefing, is individuals who have been physiologically adapted to exist in environments that don't correspond to normal terrestrial conditions. Their blood chemistry suggests they live and work in a location where the basic physical properties of atmosphere and temperature have been modified. The investigation into the suspects' backgrounds revealed another layer of impossibility. Robert Martinez, Maria Santos, and David Kim all had extensive documented histories, including birth certificates, school records, employment histories, and legal documents spanning back to their childhoods. But according to their families and former employers, all three individuals had died years earlier in separate, unrelated accidents. Robert Martinez had reportedly died in a car accident in Phoenix, Arizona in 2019. Maria Santos had drowned during a boating accident in California in 2020. David Kim had been killed in a workplace accident in Seattle in 2021. In each case, family members had held funeral services and buried the deceased individuals. Yet DNA testing confirmed that the suspects we had arrested were the same people who had supposedly died years earlier. The family's reactions to learning that their deceased relatives had been arrested in Alaska were consistent across all three cases. They insisted that the individuals were dead and buried, but when shown photographs and video footage from the arrest, they confirmed that the suspects were indeed their family members who had died years earlier. "That's definitely my brother Robert," Martinez's sister confirmed during our interview. "But I attended his funeral 3 years ago. We buried him in Riverside Cemetery in Phoenix. I don't understand how he can be alive and in Alaska when I saw his body at the funeral home." Similar confirmations came from the other families, but attempts to verify the deaths by exhuming the graves revealed another impossibility. The graves contained bodies that were identical to the deceased individuals, but the bodies showed no signs of decomposition despite having been buried for years. The corpses appeared to be in perfect condition, as if death had occurred recently rather than years earlier. Medical examination of the exhumed bodies revealed that they were identical to the arrested suspects in every measurable way. DNA, fingerprints, dental records, and even distinctive scars and birthmarks were exactly the same. But the bodies in the graves showed evidence of the specific injuries that had caused each person's death, while the arrested suspects showed no signs of ever having been injured. The investigation's most disturbing discovery came when we attempted to verify the existence of the drug distribution network described by the suspects. Following up on their claims, we conducted surveillance operations at several of the remote locations where they claimed drugs were being delivered using the organization's direct delivery systems. Our surveillance teams documented drug deliveries that occurred exactly as the suspects had described. Packages appeared instantaneously at designated locations without any visible transportation method. Customers would arrive at specific coordinates in remote wilderness areas, and drugs would materialize in their hands without any apparent source or delivery mechanism. The surveillance footage showed people standing in empty wilderness areas who would suddenly be holding packages of narcotics that had not been present moments earlier. The drugs appeared out of nowhere, were exchanged for payment, and then the customers would leave with their purchases. But no delivery personnel, vehicles, or aircraft were ever observed in the area. "We watched a drug deal happen in real time," reported the surveillance team leader. A customer walked to GPS coordinates in the middle of nowhere, stood there for 30 seconds, and then was suddenly holding a package of heroin. There was no one else in the area, no aircraft overhead, no vehicles approaching. The drugs just materialized in his hands. The investigation expanded to include monitoring of communications intercepts related to the drug organization. Customers placed orders using methods that didn't rely on phones, internet, or radio communications. Instead, they used what appeared to be a form of direct mental communication that allowed them to contact the distribution network regardless of their location or access to electronic communications. DEA technical specialists monitored electronic communications throughout Alaska, but detected no traffic related to drug orders or distribution coordination. Yet, customers continued to receive drugs at remote locations after placing orders through unknown communication methods. The organization operated a sophisticated distribution network without using any detectable electronic infrastructure. The final phase of the investigation involved attempting to locate the distribution facility described by the missing suspects. According to their statements, the facility existed in a location that was connected to all locations in Alaska simultaneously, but couldn't be reached through normal travel routes. Aerial surveys, satellite imagery analysis, and ground searches failed to identify any location that matched the suspects' descriptions. But the investigation revealed patterns in drug delivery locations that suggested the distribution center existed in a space that was somehow adjacent to multiple geographic locations simultaneously. The delivery patterns don't make sense from a logistics standpoint, explained our criminal intelligence analyst. Drugs are being delivered to locations that are hundreds of miles apart within minutes of each other. Either the organization has multiple distribution centers, or they're operating from a location that has simultaneous access to all of Alaska. 6 months after the disappearance of the 3 suspects from our transport van, we received a communication that provided closure to the investigation while raising new questions about the nature of the drug trafficking organization. A package was delivered to our Anchorage headquarters containing detailed documentation about the organization's operations and a message explaining the purpose of the December 2023 arrests. The documentation revealed that the organization was indeed operating a drug distribution network throughout Alaska using methods that transcended normal physical limitations. The distribution facility existed in what the documents described as parallel space, a location that was simultaneously connected to all geographic coordinates in Alaska, but didn't exist in normal three-dimensional reality. The organization recruited individuals who had died under specific circumstances and provided them with modified physiology that allowed them to work in the parallel space facility. Employees could access any location in Alaska instantaneously, deliver products without requiring transportation time, and communicate with customers through direct neural interface rather than electronic communications. The December 2023 interaction with Alaska State Troopers was conducted to provide law enforcement with accurate information about our capabilities and operational methods, the message explained. We appreciate the professional treatment our employees received during their temporary detention. Future cooperation will be available when law enforcement agencies demonstrate readiness to understand distribution methods that operate beyond conventional limitations. The documentation included detailed maps of drug delivery locations throughout Alaska, customer lists, and financial records showing the scope of the organization's operations. But it also contained an offer of cooperation with law enforcement agencies that were willing to acknowledge the organization's unique operational capabilities. According to the proposal, the organization would cease distribution of harmful drugs like heroin and fentanyl in exchange for law enforcement tolerance of their distribution network for less dangerous substances. They offered to provide information about other criminal organizations operating in Alaska, and to assist with search and rescue operations using their instantaneous access capabilities. The official response to this proposal was classified at the federal level, but the drug trafficking patterns in remote Alaska communities changed significantly after our investigation. Hard drugs like heroin and fentanyl disappeared from isolated villages, while marijuana and other less dangerous substances continued to be available through the same instantaneous delivery methods. Search and rescue operations in Alaska began experiencing unprecedented success rates when missing persons were reported in remote areas. Individuals who should have died from exposure or injury were found alive and healthy in locations where they couldn't have survived using normal means. Rescue teams began discovering supplies, shelter, and medical aid that appeared in wilderness areas without explanation. The 3 suspects who vanished from our transport van were never seen again, but their DNA profiles were added to a federal database of individuals who were classified as operationally deceased but functionally active. The database reportedly contains hundreds of similar cases involving people who died under specific circumstances but continue to work in organizations that operate beyond normal geographic and physical limitations. Drug trafficking investigations in Alaska now include protocols for dealing with organizations that use alternative distribution methods. Law enforcement agencies are briefed on the possibility of encountering suspects who operate from locations that don't exist in normal space, and who may disappear from secure facilities without using conventional escape methods. But the most significant change in Alaska law enforcement procedures involves transportation of suspects who claim to work for organizations with unusual capabilities. Prisoner transport vehicles are now equipped with monitoring systems designed to detect dimensional anomalies, and officers are trained to recognize signs that suspects may not be confined by normal physical limitations. Because some criminal investigations lead to places where conventional law enforcement procedures become meaningless, and some suspects exist in the space between life and death, operating from facilities that exist parallel to our normal world. The war on drugs takes on different dimensions when the enemy can deliver narcotics instantaneously across hundreds of miles and recruit employees who have transcended the limitations of mortality. The case files for Operation Arctic Pipeline remain classified, but they represent a turning point in how law enforcement agencies understand the nature of criminal organizations operating in Alaska's remote territories. Some trafficking networks exist in places that maps can't describe, using methods that physics can't explain, staffed by individuals who have moved beyond the boundary between life and death. And somewhere in the space between dimensions, Robert Martinez, Maria Santos, and David Kim continue their work in a distribution facility that exists everywhere and nowhere, serving customers throughout Alaska who have learned that some products can only be obtained from organizations that operate beyond the reach of conventional reality. Family disputes in Alaska's remote villages require delicate handling, especially when they involve child custody and contradictory claims about basic facts. I'm Trooper Amy Fletcher, and I've mediated hundreds of domestic situations during my 12 years with Alaska State Troopers. But nothing prepared me for the custody case in Kaltag Village on January 22, 2024, where a mother's desperate claims about her ex-husband's death led me into a situation that challenged everything I understood about life, death, and the legal system's ability to determine truth. The call came through dispatch at 11:34 hours from the Kaltag Village Public Safety Officer, requesting immediate assistance with a child custody dispute that had escalated beyond local resolution capabilities. Susan McKinley, age 28, was refusing to surrender her 7-year-old daughter Emma to the child's father, David McKinley, despite a valid court order granting him visitation rights during the winter school break. What made this case unusual was Susan's explanation for her refusal to comply with the court order. She insisted that David McKinley could not exercise custody rights because he had died in a snowmobile accident 3 years earlier. According to Susan, the man claiming to be Emma's father was either an imposter or something worse that she couldn't explain rationally. Kaltag is a village of 190 people located on the Yukon River, accessible only by aircraft, boat, or snowmobile, depending on seasonal conditions. During January, the village is isolated by ice and snow, with weekly mail plane service as the only regular connection to the outside world. Domestic disputes in such isolated communities often involve complex family dynamics that have festered for months without outside intervention. I arrived in Kaltag via chartered aircraft at 14:20 hours and immediately met with Village Public Safety Officer Tom Williams, who had been attempting to mediate the custody dispute for 2 days without success. Williams explained that both Susan and David McKinley were longtime village residents with extensive family connections, but their contradictory claims about David's death were creating divisions throughout the small community. "Trooper Fletcher," Williams explained as we walked toward the McKinley residence, "this situation is beyond anything I've handled in 15 years of village law enforcement. Susan McKinley is insisting that David died in 2021, and she has documentation to support her claim. But David is clearly alive and present in the village, demanding his court-ordered visitation with their daughter." The first interview was with Susan McKinley at her family's cabin on the edge of the village. Susan was obviously distraught, but her account was detailed and consistent. She explained that David had died on December 15, 2021, when his snowmobile broke through river ice during a hunting trip. His body had been recovered after a 3-day search, and she had held a funeral service attended by most of the village. "Trooper, I buried my ex-husband 3 years ago," Susan said, showing me official death certificate issued by the state of Alaska. "We were divorced, but I arranged the funeral because his family lives in Anchorage. The entire village knows David is dead. This man, who claims to be David, is not my daughter's father." Susan's documentation appeared legitimate. The death certificate was properly signed by a state medical examiner, with a cause of death listed as drowning and hypothermia following snowmobile accident. She also provided photographs from the funeral service, showing a casket surrounded by village residents and burial documentation from the Kaltag Village Cemetery. But when I interviewed David McKinley at his cabin across the village, he was equally insistent about his version of events. David, age 32, appeared healthy and normal, with a detailed knowledge of his marriage to Susan, his daughter Emma's personal history, and intimate family information that would be difficult for an imposter to fake. "I don't understand why Susan is saying I'm dead," David explained during our interview. "Yes, I had a snowmobile accident in 2021, but I survived. I spent 2 weeks recovering from injuries, then resumed normal activities. Susan and I have been co-parenting Emma according to our custody agreement ever since." David produced his own documentation: a valid Alaska driver's license, current identification cards, and court records showing the custody arrangement that granted him visitation rights with Emma. His paperwork appeared equally legitimate, with no signs of forgery or alteration. The contradiction became more complex when I interviewed other village residents. Approximately half the community confirmed Susan's account of David's death and funeral, providing detailed memories of the accident, recovery efforts, and burial service. But the other half supported David's version, insisting he had survived the accident and had been living normally in the village for the past 3 years. "I was at David's funeral," confirmed village elder Mary Peters. "We all saw his body in the casket. I helped carry flowers to the grave. That man living in David's cabin is not the David McKinley we buried." But David's cousin, Jimmy McKinley, provided equally convincing testimony. David never died. He was injured in the snowmobile accident, but he recovered. I've been hunting with him dozens of times since 2021. Anyone saying he's dead is confused or lying. The investigation expanded to include examination of physical evidence related to David's alleged death and burial. I visited the Kaltag Village Cemetery with Williams to examine the grave where David McKinley was supposedly buried. The cemetery records showed a burial on December 20th, 2021, with a headstone bearing David's name and dates. But when we examined the gravesite, we found evidence that challenged both versions of events. The headstone was present and appeared weathered appropriately for a 3-year-old burial, but the ground around the grave showed signs of recent disturbance. Soil analysis revealed that the grave had been opened and resealed within the past few months. More disturbing was what we found when I obtained permission to exhume the grave to resolve the contradictory claims about David's death. The exhumation revealed a casket that contained clothing and personal items belonging to David McKinley, but no human remains. The casket appeared to have been buried with David's belongings, but without a body. Yet David McKinley was clearly alive and present in the village, living in his own cabin and maintaining relationships with community members who supported his version of events. DNA testing confirmed that the living David was indeed Emma's biological father, and the same person listed in all official records. The medical examination revealed the most disturbing aspect of the case. David McKinley showed no signs of injury consistent with surviving a severe snowmobile accident, but his medical records from the Caltech clinic documented treatment for drowning and hypothermia in December 2021. The medical report described injuries that should have been fatal, with core body temperature readings and tissue damage that indicated clinical death. According to the medical documentation, explained the visiting physician who had treated David, this patient died from hypothermia and drowning. His vital signs showed no brain activity for over 40 minutes. We pronounced him dead and prepared the body for transport to Anchorage for autopsy. But the same physician confirmed that David was currently alive and healthy, showing no residual effects from the injuries that had reportedly killed him 3 years earlier. The medical records documented David's death, but David was clearly alive and functioning normally. The child custody dispute became secondary to the larger question of David McKinley's legal status. If he had died in 2021, he had no parental rights and could not exercise custody of Emma. But if he was alive, Susan was violating a court order by refusing to allow visitation. The resolution came when Emma McKinley herself provided information that neither parent had shared during the investigation. During a careful interview conducted with appropriate child protection protocols, Emma revealed that she had been interacting with her father regularly since his supposed death, but these interactions occurred under circumstances that her mother had taught her to keep secret. "Daddy visits me every night after Mom goes to sleep," Emma explained. "He comes through my bedroom window and we talk about school and games. But Mom says I'm not supposed to tell anyone because people wouldn't understand that Daddy is different now." Emma's account suggested that David's interactions with his daughter were not occurring during normal waking hours or through conventional means. She described conversations with her father that happened in her dreams, but contained information about current events and family situations that could not have been known through dream content alone. "Daddy knows about my school project and my friend Sarah's birthday party," Emma continued. "He helps me with homework problems that I don't understand, but he's cold when he touches me, and sometimes I can see through him like he's made of ice." Child Protective Services evaluation confirmed that Emma was not being physically harmed, but her descriptions of interactions with her father suggested exposure to phenomena that could be psychologically damaging. The evaluator recommended limiting Emma's contact with David until the nature of his condition could be determined. The final investigation involved attempting to verify David McKinley's current legal status with state and federal authorities. Record searches revealed contradictory information that reflected the same split reality experienced by Kaltag Village residents. Some databases showed David as deceased since 2021, while others showed him as alive with current identification and legal documents. Social Security Administration records listed David McKinley as deceased, with death benefits paid to Emma's guardian account. But Internal Revenue Service records showed David filing tax returns and reporting income from seasonal employment throughout 2022 and 2023. Alaska Department of Motor Vehicles had issued him a renewed driver's license in 2023, but the Department of Health and Social Services had his death certificate on file. The bureaucratic impossibility of David's simultaneous existence and non-existence created legal challenges that had no precedent in Alaska family court procedures. Judge Patricia Williams, who had issued the original custody order, requested a formal determination of David McKinley's vital status before proceeding with enforcement actions. But the medical evaluation that was supposed to resolve David's legal status revealed the extent of his impossible condition. Physical examination confirmed that David exhibited all normal signs of life: heartbeat, breathing, body temperature, and brain activity. But detailed testing revealed abnormalities that challenged basic understanding of human physiology. David's core body temperature was consistently 89 degrees Fahrenheit, approximately 9 degrees below normal human levels, but stable over multiple measurements. His blood work showed cellular structures that were consistent with tissue that had been frozen and thawed, but his organs functioned normally despite evidence of severe cold damage. Most significantly, radiocarbon dating of his hair and nail samples indicated biological age that was inconsistent with continued growth after December 2021. What you're dealing with, the state medical examiner explained, is an individual who shows clear evidence of having died from hypothermia and drowning 3 years ago, but who continues to exhibit vital signs and normal cognitive function. This case represents an unprecedented situation in forensic medicine. The custody case concluded when David McKinley voluntarily relinquished his parental rights, acknowledging that his condition created circumstances that were not in Emma's best interests. But his decision came with a request that Susan allow him to maintain limited contact with his daughter under supervised conditions that would not compromise her psychological development. "I understand that my situation is unusual," David stated during the final court hearing. "I don't fully comprehend what happened to me during the snowmobile accident, but I know that I love my daughter and want what's best for her. If maintaining distance is necessary for her welfare, I accept that responsibility." Susan McKinley was granted full custody, but agreed to supervised visitation arrangements that would allow Emma to maintain a relationship with her father under controlled circumstances. The visitation would occur during daylight hours at the village community center with a counselor present to ensure Emma's psychological protection. The official case files were sealed due to the sensitive nature of the circumstances, but David McKinley's situation became part of ongoing research into phenomena reported throughout Alaska's remote communities. Similar cases involving individuals who continue to function after documented deaths have been reported in isolated villages where extreme weather conditions and limited medical facilities create circumstances that challenge conventional understanding of mortality. Village residents adapted to David's continued presence with the practical acceptance that characterizes rural Alaska communities. Some villagers acknowledged his existence and maintained normal social relationships, while others continued to treat him as deceased and avoided contact. Emma learned to navigate the complex reality of having a father who existed in the space between life and death. But the most lasting impact of the custody case was the recognition that Alaska's isolated communities sometimes develop their own understanding of life and death that doesn't correspond to legal or medical definitions used in the outside world. In places where survival depends on community cooperation and harsh conditions test the limits of human endurance, the boundary between living and dead becomes more flexible than bureaucratic systems can accommodate. David McKinley continues to live in Kaltag Village, working seasonal jobs and maintaining relationships with community members who accept his unusual status. Emma visits him regularly under the supervised arrangement, developing a relationship with her father that acknowledges both his love for her and the impossibility of his continued existence. because some custody disputes involve more than determining which parent should care for a child. Sometimes they require deciding whether parental rights can be exercised by someone who has legally died but continues to love their family from the cold space between mortality and whatever comes after. DUI stops in Alaska require careful attention to detail, especially when dealing with impaired drivers who might become lost in wilderness areas where hypothermia kills faster than alcohol poisoning. I'm Trooper Tom Bradley, and what started as a routine traffic stop for erratic driving on the park's highway near Healy on February 18, 2024, became a missing persons investigation that led to an address that has never existed on any map. The initial stop was textbook standard. William Harper, age 45, was driving a 2019 Ford pickup truck in a manner consistent with alcohol impairment, weaving between lanes, inconsistent speed, and delayed responses to traffic signals. His blood alcohol content measured 0.14, well above the legal limit, requiring arrest and vehicle impoundment. During the booking process, Harper provided an address in Fairbanks, 1247 Northern Lights Boulevard, Apartment 3B. He was coherent, cooperative, and showed no signs of disorientation beyond normal alcohol impairment. Harper explained that he had been driving home from a bar in Healy and was familiar with the route, though he acknowledged drinking too much to drive safely. The complications began when we attempted to contact Harper's emergency contact person at his provided address. Directory assistance showed no listings for 1247 Northern Lights Boulevard. GPS systems could not locate the address. Even more puzzling, Fairbanks City planning records showed that Northern Lights Boulevard ended at number 1200, with no buildings constructed beyond that point. Harper insisted his address was correct and provided detailed descriptions of his apartment building, neighboring businesses, and local landmarks. His descriptions were accurate for the Northern Lights Boulevard area, but referenced buildings and locations that city planning documents showed had never been constructed. "I've lived at that address for 7 years," Harper explained during questioning. "It's a 3-story brick apartment building with a green roof next to Murphy's hardware store and across from the Northside Diner. I pay rent to Goldstream Property Management every month." None of the businesses Harper mentioned existed at the locations he described. Murphy's hardware store had been demolished in 2015, and the Northside Diner had never operated on Northern Lights Boulevard. Goldstream Property Management had no records of William Harper as a tenant at any of their properties. The investigation expanded when Harper's driver's license and vehicle registration both listed the same non-existent address. His insurance documents, credit cards, and employment records all confirmed his residence at 1247 Northern Lights Boulevard, Apartment 3B, but physical verification of the location was impossible. Harper's employer, Northern Construction Company, confirmed that he had worked for them for 5 years and had always provided the Northern Lights Boulevard address for employment records. His co-workers described visiting his apartment for social gatherings and confirmed the existence of the building Harper described. But when officers accompanied Harper's co-workers to the address, they found an empty lot that had never been developed. City records showed the land had been zoned for residential construction, but no building permits had ever been issued for apartment development. The most disturbing discovery came when we attempted to trace Harper's background and financial history. His credit report showed monthly rent payments to Goldstream Property Management for 7 years, but the company had no record of receiving these payments. His bank statements documented automatic rent deductions, but the funds disappeared into accounts that didn't exist. Harper's tax returns listed the Northern Lights Boulevard address for 7 years, and Internal Revenue Service records showed mail delivery to that location. but Postal Service records indicated that no mail delivery route included 1247 Northern Lights Boulevard because the address didn't exist. The DUI case transformed into a missing persons investigation when Harper failed to appear for his court hearing. Officers sent to his listed address for a welfare check found only the empty lot. Harper's vehicle, which had been impounded after his arrest, had disappeared from the secure police storage facility despite being locked in a building, with no signs of forced entry. Harper's disappearance led to the discovery that similar cases had been occurring throughout Alaska for years. Drivers arrested for DUI who provided addresses that didn't exist, then vanished from custody or failed to appear for court proceedings. In each case, the individuals had detailed knowledge of non-existent locations and maintained impossible residential histories. The investigation revealed that William Harper and others like him exist in a parallel version of Alaska, where geographical development followed different patterns. They live in buildings that were planned but never constructed, work for companies that were proposed but never established, and maintain addresses that exist in the space between what was intended and what actually happened. Because some people become lost between the Alaska that exists and the Alaska that was supposed to exist, living in the blueprint version of our state where all the planned developments were completed and all the proposed infrastructure was built. DUI stops sometimes lead to missing persons cases when drivers provide directions to locations that exist only in the parallel Alaska where they actually live. Noise complaints in Alaska's remote areas usually involve generators running too late, dogs barking excessively, or seasonal workers celebrating too loudly in areas where sound carries for miles. I'm Trooper Carol Jensen, and the noise complaint I responded to at Pine Lake on August 14, 2023, involved a family that was creating disturbances in a cabin that had been empty for over 20 years. The complaint came from Martha Williams, who owned a seasonal cabin approximately half a mile from the source of the noise. Martha had been visiting Pine Lake every summer for 15 years, and was familiar with all the seasonal residents and property owners in the area. She contacted our dispatch because the Kowalski cabin, which had been abandoned since 2003, was generating family sounds that continued throughout the night. Trooper Jensen, Martha explained. I can hear children playing, adults talking, and normal family activities coming from that cabin every evening after sunset. But I know for certain that nobody lives there. The property has been empty since old Pete Kowalski died 20 years ago. The Kowalski cabin was located on 40 acres of waterfront property that had been inherited by family members living in the lower 48. According to property records, the heirs had never visited Alaska and had been trying to sell the property for decades without success. The cabin had no utilities, no maintained access road, and had been deteriorating from weather exposure for 20 years. But when I conducted surveillance of the property, I documented exactly what Martha Williams had reported. Every evening between sunset and sunrise, the cabin produced sounds consistent with active family occupation. Children's voices could be heard playing games, adults engaged in conversation, and normal domestic activities like cooking, cleaning, and bedtime routines. The sounds were clear and detailed enough to identify specific activities. Children arguing over board games, parents calling them to dinner, television programs playing, and family discussions about daily activities. The audio was consistent with a family of 4 or 5 people maintaining normal household routines. But visual observation revealed that the cabin remained dark and apparently unoccupied throughout the periods when family sounds were most active. No lights were visible through the windows, no smoke came from the chimney, and no vehicles were present at the property. Yet the sounds continued with remarkable consistency and detail. I obtained permission from the property heirs to conduct an interior investigation of the cabin. The building was structurally unsound, with collapsed sections of roofing, rotted flooring, and extensive water damage from decades of weather exposure. The interior was filled with debris, abandoned furniture, and showed no signs of recent human occupation. But recording equipment positioned inside the cabin documented the family sounds with greater clarity and detail than external surveillance. The recordings captured complete conversations, children's bedtime stories, and family interactions that suggested intimate knowledge of individual personalities and relationships. The audio analysis revealed something disturbing about the nature of the sounds. The family conversations contained references to current events, technology, and cultural developments that had occurred years after the cabin was abandoned. The Phantom family was apparently keeping up with modern life, despite existing in a building that had been uninhabitable for decades. More puzzling was that the family sounds responded to external stimuli. When I knocked on the cabin door during the evening activity periods, the interior conversation would pause, footsteps would approach the door, and a voice would ask, "Who's there?" But when I identified myself as a police officer, the sounds would stop completely until the following evening. The investigation expanded to include research into the Kowalski family history and the circumstances of Pete Kowalski's death in 2003. Pete had lived alone in the cabin after his wife died in 1998, but neighbors reported that he often spoke about visits from his children and grandchildren who lived in Seattle. Pete's children confirmed that they had never visited the Alaska cabin and had urged their father to move to a retirement facility in Washington rather than live alone in such an isolated location. But Pete insisted that his family visited regularly, and that the cabin was filled with the sounds of children and grandchildren who brought joy to his final years. Local residents remembered Pete talking about family gatherings, holiday celebrations, and summer visits from grandchildren who played around the lake and filled the cabin with laughter. But official records showed that Pete's family had not visited Alaska since the 1990s, and Pete had died alone with no family present. The noise complaint investigation revealed that the family sounds at the Kowalski cabin were not random phenomena, but consistent patterns that matched Pete's descriptions of family visits that had never actually occurred. The Phantom family represented Pete's longing for connection with relatives who remained absent throughout his final years. But the sounds continue 20 years after Pete's death, suggesting that his desire for family presence had become embedded in the cabin itself. The building maintains the family atmosphere Pete had created through imagination and loneliness, producing the sounds of children and grandchildren who exist in the space between Pete's wishes and reality. Other isolated properties throughout Alaska have reported similar phenomena. Cabins owned by elderly residents who died alone continue to produce sounds of family gatherings, children playing, and holiday celebrations that represent the social connections the deceased owners had longed for during their final years. Because loneliness in Alaska's remote areas can become so profound that it creates its own presence, filling empty cabins with the sounds of families that exist only in the desperate imagination of people who died alone. The noise complaints continue, but they represent not disturbances but manifestations of the human need for connection that transcends death itself. Search and rescue operations in Alaska require systematic coverage of terrain using proven search patterns that ensure no areas are overlooked. After 14 years with Alaska State Troopers, I've coordinated hundreds of searches for missing hikers, hunters, and outdoor enthusiasts. I'm Trooper Lisa Andrews, and the search for Rebecca Chen on September 6, 2023, resulted in finding our missing hiker in a location that our teams had already searched thoroughly multiple times. Rebecca Chen, age 29, was reported missing by her hiking partner when she failed to return to their campsite in Denali National Park after a solo day hike to photograph wildlife. Rebecca was an experienced outdoors enthusiast with advanced wilderness survival skills, but she had been missing for 72 hours in an area where overnight temperatures could be fatal without proper shelter. The search area encompassed approximately 15 square miles of challenging terrain, including dense forest, creek drainages, and steep ridges. Our search teams used standard grid patterns that ensured 100% coverage of all possible routes Rebecca might have taken during her photography expedition. Day 1 of the search involved 6 teams of 2 searchers each, covering the terrain in overlapping patterns that left no area unexamined. Each team carried GPS units that recorded their exact search paths, creating digital maps that confirmed complete coverage of the search area. By the end of Day 1, we had systematically examined every square meter of terrain where Rebecca could potentially be located. Day 2 expanded the search to include helicopter overflights and additional ground teams. The helicopter crew conducted visual searches of areas that were difficult to access on foot, while ground teams researched critical areas along Rebecca's planned route. Again, GPS tracking confirmed that all terrain had been covered comprehensively. By Day 3, we had searched the same areas multiple times using different teams, various approaches, and enhanced technology, including thermal imaging and GPS tracking of every footstep taken by search personnel. The search had been as thorough as technically possible, yet Rebecca remained missing. At 14:30 hours on Day 3, Search Team Alpha reported finding Rebecca Chen in a small clearing approximately 200 meters from the main trail. She was conscious, uninjured, and sitting beside a campfire where she appeared to have been waiting for rescue. Rebecca seemed surprised that a search operation had been conducted, and insisted she had been in the clearing for only a few hours. But GPS records showed that Search Team Alpha had examined that exact clearing at least 6 times during the 3-day operation. The clearing had been photographed, mapped, and documented as empty during multiple searches by different teams. Electronic records confirmed that searchers had walked through the location where Rebecca was found, had used that clearing as a rest point, and had even eaten lunch there on Day 2 of the search. "I've been here since yesterday afternoon," Rebecca explained during her medical evaluation. "I got disoriented during my photography hike and decided to stay in one place rather than risk getting more lost. I built a fire and waited for rescue, but I'm surprised it took you so long to find me." Rebecca's account of her activities during the missing period was detailed and consistent. She described spending 2 nights in the clearing, maintaining her fire, rationing her emergency food supplies, and using survival techniques to stay warm during cold nights. But search teams had documented that the clearing showed no signs of recent fire activity, camping, or human presence during their repeated examinations. The medical examination revealed that Rebecca was in excellent condition despite claiming to have spent 3 days outdoors with limited supplies. She showed no signs of dehydration, hypothermia, or stress that would be expected after an extended wilderness survival situation. Most puzzling was that her clothing and equipment showed no evidence of outdoor exposure or campfire smoke. Search Team Alpha's leader confirmed the impossibility of the situation. "We searched that clearing thoroughly on Day 1, used it as a staging area on Day 2, and walked through it multiple times on Day 3. There was no person, no campfire, no signs of recent human activity. Rebecca wasn't there until the moment we found her." The investigation into Rebecca's disappearance and reappearance revealed additional anomalies that challenged our understanding of her experience. Rebecca's camera contained photographs taken during her missing period that showed the same clearing where she was found, but the images depicted landscape features and vegetation that didn't match the actual terrain. Rebecca's photographs showed the clearing in different seasons. Some images appeared to be taken during spring with wildflowers blooming. others during autumn with colorful foliage, and some during winter with snow cover. But Rebecca had been missing during September, and the actual clearing showed only late summer vegetation appropriate for the season. More disturbing was that Rebecca's photographs included images of people and activities that had not occurred during her missing period. Photos showed other hikers, wildlife photographers, and even search and rescue personnel in the clearing, but the individuals in the photographs could not be identified as current park visitors or search team members. The investigation expanded to include consultation with temporal physics specialists and experts in dimensional phenomena. Rebecca's experience appeared to involve displacement to a version of the clearing that existed across multiple time periods simultaneously, where she could observe and photograph events from different seasons and years. What Rebecca documented, the consulting physicist explained, suggests that certain locations in Alaska's wilderness exist in multiple temporal states simultaneously. She may have spent her missing period in a version of the clearing that encompasses past, present, and future events occurring in the same geographic space. Rebecca's case led to the discovery that similar search and rescue incidents had occurred throughout Alaska's national parks. Missing persons found in locations that had been searched extensively, with accounts of experiences that didn't match the physical evidence at recovery sites. Search teams began documenting cases where missing persons were found in areas that searchers had examined repeatedly, often sitting calmly as if they had been waiting in obvious locations that had somehow been invisible during systematic searches. The missing persons typically showed no awareness that extensive search operations had been conducted. The pattern suggested that certain wilderness locations in Alaska exist in temporal states that allow people to become displaced from normal time flow while remaining in the same geographic position. Missing persons spend their time in parallel versions of familiar locations, invisible to searchers operating in normal temporal reality. Rebecca Chen returned to her normal life with detailed memories of her wilderness experience, but the photographs from her missing period remain unexplained. The images document events and seasons that didn't occur during her disappearance, providing evidence of temporal displacement that challenges conventional understanding of search and rescue operations. Because sometimes missing persons aren't lost in space, but displaced in time, existing in familiar locations that occur across multiple temporal periods simultaneously. Search teams may walk through the exact locations where missing persons are waiting, but in different time streams that make the lost individuals invisible until temporal alignment allows discovery. Wellness checks on elderly residents living alone in Alaska's remote areas are among our most important responsibilities, especially during extreme weather conditions when isolation can become life-threatening. I'm Trooper Karen Mitchell, and the wellness check I conducted on Harold Vance at his cabin near Chicken, Alaska on May 12, 2024, revealed circumstances that challenged everything I understood about death, preservation, and the passage of time. Harold Vance, age 74, had lived alone in a remote cabin for over 30 years, maintaining minimal contact with the outside world through monthly supply deliveries and annual welfare checks. His isolation was voluntary. Harold preferred wilderness solitude to social interaction, and had developed a self-sufficient lifestyle that required little external support. The wellness check was requested by the mailplane pilot who delivered Harold's monthly supplies. The pilot reported that Harold had not collected his April delivery, and the May delivery had been left at the cabin with no sign of Harold's presence. Given Harold's age and the harsh winter conditions, the pilot was concerned about his welfare. Harold's cabin was located 47 miles northeast of Chicken, accessible only by bush plane or snowmobile depending on seasonal conditions. The property was completely isolated, with no neighbors within 20 miles, and no communication systems except for an emergency radio that Harold rarely used. I reached Harold's cabin via helicopter at 11:15 hours and immediately noticed signs that suggested Harold might be in distress. His monthly supply deliveries were stacked outside the cabin unopened. Snow had accumulated against doors and windows without being cleared, and there was no smoke from the chimney despite sub-freezing temperatures. The cabin door was unlocked, which was normal for Harold's trusting approach to wilderness living. Inside, I found Harold Vance sitting in his favorite chair beside the wood stove, appearing to be peacefully sleeping. But when I approached to check his condition, I realized that Harold was dead, and had been dead for a considerable time. What made Harold's condition unusual was his state of preservation. Despite being deceased, Harold showed no signs of decomposition, discoloration, or physical deterioration that would normally occur after death. His body appeared to be in perfect condition, as if death had occurred recently rather than months earlier. The cabin's interior provided clues about the timeline of Harold's death. His calendar showed entries through November 2023, but no markings for December, January, February, March, or April. Food supplies indicated that Harold had not been eating for months, and the wood stove contained ashes from what appeared to be the last fire he had built in late November. But Harold's body showed none of the effects of extended exposure to cold temperatures or the natural decomposition process that should have occurred over 6 months. His skin retained normal color and texture. His clothing was clean and unwrinkled, and he appeared to be merely sleeping rather than deceased. The medical examination revealed the extent of Harold's impossible preservation. Core body temperature readings showed that his body had maintained a consistent 35 degrees Fahrenheit throughout the winter months, cold enough to prevent decomposition, but warm enough to preserve tissue integrity. His body had essentially become a perfect preservation system that maintained his physical condition indefinitely. More puzzling was evidence that Harold had continued some activities after his death. His journal contained entries dated through April 2024, written in his distinctive handwriting and describing daily activities, weather observations, and philosophical reflections about wilderness life. But medical examination confirmed that Harold had died in November 2023. The journal entries from Harold's post-death period were detailed and coherent, showing no signs of mental deterioration or confusion. Harold wrote about maintaining his cabin, observing wildlife, and enjoying the solitude of winter in Alaska's wilderness. The entries described a peaceful, contemplative existence that continued for months after his physical death. December 15th, 2023. Heavy snowfall last night. The cabin is warm and comfortable. I've been reading Thoreau again and thinking about the value of solitude. The wilderness teaches patience better than any human institution. February 3rd, 2024. Saw a wolf pack traveling along the creek. They moved with such purpose and unity. I understand now why the old-timers spoke of learning from the animals. Death is just another season in the natural cycle. April 18th, 2024. Spring is coming early this year. I can feel the change in the air even though the snow remains deep. My time here has been a gift beyond measure. I have no regrets about choosing solitude over society. The investigation revealed that Harold Vance had achieved a form of peaceful existence that transcended the boundary between life and death. His profound contentment with wilderness solitude had created conditions that allowed his consciousness to continue, while his body entered a state of perfect preservation. Local indigenous communities were familiar with similar phenomena among elders who had achieved deep spiritual connection with Alaska's wilderness. These individuals were said to continue their peaceful existence after physical death, maintaining their cabins and enjoying the solitude they had chosen during life. Harold's case was classified as natural death from old age, but the circumstances of his preservation and continued consciousness represented something beyond conventional medical understanding. His body was treated with the respect due to someone who had achieved a rare form of harmony between human life and wilderness existence. The cabin was left undisturbed according to Harold's wishes expressed in his final journal entries. He had requested that his body remain in the chair where he had spent his final months, allowing his consciousness to continue enjoying the wilderness solitude that had brought him such profound peace. Harold Vance's wellness check revealed that some individuals become so perfectly adapted to Alaska's wilderness that death becomes simply another aspect of their harmonious existence. His preserved body continues to sit peacefully in the cabin, maintaining the contemplative solitude that defined his life and transcended his death. Because sometimes wellness checks discover that death is not an ending, but a transformation into a deeper form of wilderness connection, where consciousness continues in perfect harmony with the natural cycles that govern life in Alaska's most remote territories. Security alarms don't typically activate at locations that have been abandoned for 37 years. I'm Trooper Steve Patterson, and when the motion sensors at the old Copper Ridge mine triggered our dispatch system at 03:47 hours on March 3, 2024, I assumed we were dealing with teenagers exploring off-limits industrial sites or transients seeking shelter from Alaska's brutal winter. The Copper Ridge mine had been sealed and abandoned since 1987 when declining copper prices made the operation economically unfeasible. The mine entrance was blocked with reinforced concrete barriers. All buildings were boarded and secured, and warning signs posted throughout the property. Most importantly, the entire facility was surrounded by chain-link fencing topped with razor wire that had been installed by the state to prevent unauthorized access. But someone had definitely been inside the main office building. Fresh boot prints in the snow led directly to a side door that showed signs of forced entry. The prints were clear and recent, made within the past 6 hours based on snow accumulation patterns. What made this break-in unusual was that the boot prints approached the building from inside the fenced perimeter, not from outside where someone would logically enter the property. The building's interior showed extensive evidence of recent human activity. Furniture had been moved, filing cabinets had been opened and searched, and someone had been operating the electrical systems despite the fact that power to the facility had been disconnected decades earlier. Fresh coffee was brewing in the break room, and space heaters were running to maintain comfortable temperatures throughout the building. But the security footage revealed the impossibility of the situation. The building's surveillance system, which had been installed in 1985 and should have been non-functional, had recorded continuous activity throughout the night. The footage showed workers in period-appropriate mining company uniforms conducting normal office operations, filing paperwork, answering phones, and maintaining equipment schedules. The workers appeared to be the same employees who had worked at the mine in 1987. Personnel records confirmed their identities, but also confirmed that most of these individuals had died years or decades ago. Yet, the security footage showed them working normal shifts, following 1987 operational procedures, and discussing mining activities as if the facility had never been closed. The investigation revealed that the Copper Ridge mine had been experiencing similar break-ins for 37 years. Every few months, motion sensors would detect activity, fresh evidence of occupation would be found, and surveillance footage would document the deceased workforce conducting normal operations. But each incident was dismissed as equipment malfunction or environmental factors triggering false alarms. Local mining company executives confirmed that former employees occasionally reported for work at the abandoned facility, apparently unaware that the mine had been closed for decades. These individuals would arrive during their original shift schedules, attempt to perform their former job duties, and express confusion when confronted about the facility's closure. The break-in investigation concluded that the Copper Ridge mine continues to operate on a schedule that exists parallel to current reality. The deceased workforce maintains their employment responsibilities. The facility operates using power sources that don't exist, and mining operations continue extracting resources from deposits that were exhausted decades ago. Because some workplaces become so embedded in their employees' consciousness that closure doesn't terminate the obligation to report for duty. The mine remembers every shift, every worker, and every day of operation, creating an employment schedule that transcends the boundaries between past and present, life and death.